The moment my mother-in-law stood up at our rehearsal dinner and announced to the entire restaurant that her son had made the worst mistake of his life, I felt every single person in that room turn to look at me. I was holding a glass of sparkling water. I don't drink. And I remember thinking, don't spill it. Just don't spill it. Like that was the thing that mattered. My name is June Whitfield. I'm 31 years old. I work as a pediatric occupational therapist at a children's clinic in Columbus, Ohio. I drive a 2017 Civic with a dent on the rear bumper from a parking garage incident I still haven't fixed. I rent a 2-bedroom apartment with my cat Biscuit. I am, by most people's definition, ordinary. And for a long time, I thought ordinary was something to apologize for. That night at the rehearsal dinner, I learned I was wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, the real beginning, not the dramatic part. Though I promise you'll get there. I met my husband at a coffee shop, not a cute indie place with exposed brick and oat milk lattes. I mean a Dunkin Donuts off Route 40, the kind with the flickering fluorescent light above the corner booth that nobody ever gets fixed. It was a Tuesday in February, which is the most aggressively unromantic combination of day and month I can think of. I was grading activity sheets for a patient. I sometimes bring work to quiet spots. And he was sitting across from me, not bothering me at all, reading a beat-up paperback copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden. I noticed the book first. I'd read it twice. I almost didn't say anything because I generally don't talk to strangers, but something about the way he dog-eared the page before closing it, carefully, respectfully, like the book was borrowed, made me say, that's the one where you keep expecting a happy ending and it just keeps not happening. He looked up. He had calm eyes. Not striking, not movie star anything. Just calm. Like a person who had figured something out that most people hadn't. That's exactly what makes it worth finishing, he said. His name was Fletcher. Fletcher Alderman. He told me that night he worked in logistics. I didn't ask more than that because I wasn't trying to impress him or evaluate him. I just liked talking to him. We ended up closing down that Dunkin Donuts. And if you've ever been to a Dunkin Donuts at 9:30 on a Tuesday in February, you know that closing it down means you're the last 2 people left, and the teenager mopping the floor is giving you significant looks. We exchanged numbers. He texted first. 3 days later, we got dinner at a Thai place on 5th Street that he described as reliably good, not trying to be anything. I appreciated that. I've always been suspicious of places that try too hard. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. During those 14 months, I met none of his family. I want to be clear about that, not because he was hiding them or hiding me, but because it was complicated in a way he was honest about from the beginning. My family is a lot, he said. Maybe the 3rd or 4th time we went out. We were walking along the Seattle River, which sounds more romantic than it is in early March. My mother in particular. She has very specific ideas about everything really, who I should be, what I should do, who I should be, what I should be with. And you don't agree with her, I said. I haven't agreed with her about much since I was 22, he said. But that doesn't mean she stopped having opinions. I told him I understood. I came from a family where people said what they thought without necessarily thinking about whether they should. I knew how that went. What I didn't fully understand then, what I couldn't have understood, was the specific shape of his mother's disapproval, because it wasn't just about personality. It was about category. She had a category for the kind of woman her son should marry, and I did not fit inside it. Fletcher never told me what that category looked like. I think now he was protecting me, or maybe protecting the relationship from becoming about something it wasn't. He loved me because I was direct and a little weird, and because I cried at a nature documentary once, and then laughed at myself for crying. He loved me in a way that felt like being seen rather than assessed, which is rarer than it sounds. When he proposed, we were in my kitchen. He'd cooked dinner. He cooked better than me, which was a surprise and a relief. And after we'd eaten, he just said, quietly, I want to do this with you. All of it. Is that something you want too? I said yes. I didn't need the ring first, though there was one and it was beautiful. A simple oval sapphire that he'd chosen because he remembered I'd once said I found diamonds a little cold. We decided to have a real engagement, an actual wedding, not a courthouse thing, which meant, eventually, meeting his family. The first time I met his mother was at a coffee shop, a nicer one than Dunkin, with the exposed brick and everything, about 6 weeks after we got engaged. Fletcher had warned me. He'd given me what I can only describe as a briefing. She will ask questions that feel like interviews, he said. She will make observations that are technically compliments but don't feel like them. She may reference my ex-girlfriend. Just know that I am completely on your side, and if at any point you want to leave, we leave. His mother's name is Constance. She walked in 12 minutes late wearing a camel coat and a single strand of pearls and looked at me the way a person looks at a restaurant when they'd hoped it would be better than it is. She shook my hand. She sat down. She asked what I did. Pediatric occupational therapy, I said. I work with kids who have developmental delays, sensory processing challenges, motor difficulties. We help them build the skills they need to participate in daily life. There was a pause. That must be very tiring, she said. Not meaningful, not important, or admirable, or even interesting. Tiring. Like I told her I carried luggage for a living. I said it could be, and that I found it rewarding, and she nodded in the way people nod when they've already moved on mentally. Then she spent the next 40 minutes talking about Fletcher's cousin's wedding venue, a summer property in Newport, Rhode Island, and how venues of that caliber set a tone for a marriage. Fletcher caught my eye across the table twice. I kept my expression neutral. I was not asked about my own family. I was not asked about what I loved about her son, or what we had in common, or where we were thinking of living. I was assessed, found lacking, and then effectively ignored, all within the span of an appetizer. Fletcher apologized in the car. I told him he didn't have to. I'd handled worse, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't settle somewhere in me, cold and heavy, the way February does when you've been hoping for spring. We planned the wedding for the following October, a small ceremony at a converted farmhouse venue outside Columbus. Not Newport, not a country club, not the kind of place that sets a tone. Just a place I thought was genuinely beautiful, with old wood beams and a meadow and string lights that looked like something from a world that was kinder than the regular one. Constance did not approve of the venue. She did not say so directly. She was never direct. But she mentioned twice that October in Ohio was unpredictable, and once that the farmhouse photos looked rustic, with the particular inflection that makes rustic sound like a problem. Fletcher handled her. He was patient in a way I had come to deeply admire. Patient in a way that came not from weakness, but from practice. From years of knowing that arguing with his mother was like arguing with weather. You could be right and still get rained on. In the weeks before the wedding, Fletcher's brother Dwight reached out to me separately. I hadn't met Dwight. He lived in Portland, worked in something to do with sustainable architecture, and had what Fletcher described as the healthiest relationship with our family of anyone in it, mostly because he's 3,000 miles away. Dwight texted me to say he was excited to meet me, and that Fletcher had talked about me in a way he'd never heard his brother talk about anyone. I liked Dwight immediately. Fletcher's father had passed away 4 years earlier. I knew this. Fletcher didn't talk about him often, but when he did, it was with the specific quietness of someone who still missed a person badly. The rehearsal dinner was the Thursday before the Saturday wedding. We'd booked a private room at an Italian restaurant downtown, a real one, not a chain, the kind with handmade pasta and a wine list organized by region. Fletcher had wanted somewhere warm and real. I agreed. Everything was fine until dessert. We were somewhere in the middle of a tiramisu and a toast from my best friend, Petra, who is funny in the dry, precise way that makes people laugh when they weren't expecting to. When Constance stood up, she didn't ask for the floor. She didn't tap a glass. She just stood, and the way she stood, straight, deliberate, like she'd been waiting, made the room go quiet on its own. "I'd like to say something," she said. Fletcher's hand found mine under the table. What she said, I am going to try to reproduce as accurately as I can. because I've replayed it enough times that I have it memorized. She said that she loved her son and only wanted what was best for him. She said that a mother's job was to be honest even when it was uncomfortable. She said that she had watched Fletcher work hard his whole life to build something, and that she hoped, she used the word hoped, that he wasn't making a decision based on sentiment, rather than sense. She looked at me when she said sentiment. She said that she had nothing against me personally, which is what people say right before they say something personal. She said that she'd expected Fletcher to choose a partner who matched his, and here she paused, in the way that pauses are sometimes chosen for effect, his potential. Someone at the table made a small sound. I don't know who. Then she sat down. The room was so quiet I could hear the kitchen. Fletcher stood up. I felt his hand leave mine, and I thought briefly, wildly, of every movie where someone gives a speech at exactly this moment, and I thought, please don't. Please just sit down. We can talk about this later. We don't need a scene. But he didn't look at his mother. He looked at me, and then he said very calmly, "She doesn't know who you are. Should we tell her?" I knew what he meant. I had always known in some form what he meant, but I had spent 14 months loving him in the ordinary way, and the Dunkin Donuts way, and the dented Civic and the cat named Biscuit way, and I had never wanted that to change. I shook my head, very slightly. Later, he squeezed my hand and sat down. My best friend Petra cleared her throat and raised her glass and said, "To June and Fletcher, who are going to be absolutely fine." And enough people laughed that the air came back into the room. But I saw Constance's expression. She had heard Fletcher's question. She didn't understand it yet. She would. Here is what Constance did not know. Because Fletcher and I had chosen not to make it the headline of our relationship, Fletcher's father, before he died, had built one of the more successful regional logistics and supply chain companies in the Midwest. Not a household name. Not the kind of company that advertises during football games, but the kind that quietly moves medical equipment and cold chain pharmaceuticals and industrial components across 12 states in turns in a good year. Something in the neighborhood of $40 million in revenue. When Fletcher's father passed away, he left the company and the majority of its assets to his two sons equally. Fletcher had continued running it, not from some glass office tower, which is why nobody knew. He operated mostly from a converted warehouse space outside the city that looked, from the outside, like it stored boats. He had a staff of 41. He had contracts with hospital networks in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. He took meetings in jeans. He drove a 6-year-old pickup truck because he found new trucks excessive. He had never once, in 14 months, led with any abyss, because, and I am quoting him exactly, from a conversation we had maybe 3 months in, when I had started to sense there was more to the logistics story. I spent my 20s watching people decide who I was before they knew me. I didn't want that with you. I had told him it didn't matter to me either way. I meant it. I was not with Fletcher because of any of this. I was with him because of the dog-eared Steinbeck and the reliably good Thai food and the way he listened when I talked about a patient having a breakthrough, listened like it was the most important thing happening in the world at that moment. But the morning after the rehearsal dinner, his mother called him, and then she called Dwight, and then somehow, through a path I don't entirely understand, involving the cousin who worked in commercial real estate and apparently knew someone who knew Fletcher's company, Constance learned what she had not known the night before. She showed up at the farmhouse venue 2 hours before the wedding. I was in the bridal suite, which was just a nice room with good light and a full-length mirror, with Petra and my younger sister who had flown in from Phoenix. Petra was doing something complicated with my hair. My sister was stress-eating the charcuterie we'd ordered and narrating it guiltily. The venue coordinator knocked and said, "June, there's a Constance here. She's asking to see you." Petra and my sister exchanged a look over my head. "Let her in," I said. Constance looked different at 2 in the afternoon without an audience. Smaller somehow. She was still in the camel coat. She'd been wearing it on a 72-degree morning, and I remember wondering if it was armor. She didn't apologize immediately. She walked in and looked around the room. At the dress on the hanger and the bouquet on the table, and the open bottle of champagne my sister had started without us. And then she looked at me. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words came out like they'd been rehearsed. Maybe they had. "Yes," I said. Just that. Not "it's okay," not "don't worry about it," not the reflexive softening I'd spent a lifetime doing. I have worked with children who couldn't find the words to say what they needed, and one thing that job teaches you is that sometimes the most important thing is just to let a feeling land without rushing to cover it up. She blinked. I don't think she'd expected that. "I made assumptions," she said. "You did? About who you were? About what you could offer my son?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "But I want to be honest with you, Constance. It wouldn't have been okay even if Fletcher didn't have the company. What you said last night, the way you said it, that was about me, not about my bank account. And the thing that's going to matter in 10 years, in 20 years, is whether you decided to know me or not. The money doesn't change that." I don't know where that came from exactly. Somewhere real, I think. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Petra made a very small, barely audible sound of tension from across the room. Then Constance said, "You're more than I expected." I told her I hoped that was the beginning of something and not just the end of an awkward moment. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her eyes, but it was a start. She went and found her seat. Fletcher was waiting at the end of the aisle when I got there, and I watched his face change the moment he saw me coming. That specific change that happens when someone is glad, genuinely, privately glad, in a way that has nothing to do with the dress or the flowers or the weather, which was, despite Constance's concerns, a perfect Ohio October afternoon. During the ceremony, when the officiant asked if anyone had objections, there was a half-second where I heard someone near the back shift in their seat. Probably nothing. Probably Dwight, who I later learned had eaten something questionable at the hotel breakfast. We said our vows. They were not poetic. We had written them ourselves, which meant they were specific and a little awkward and completely true. Fletcher started with, "I fell for you in a Dunkin Donuts in February," which I think proves something about the nature of luck. Mine started with, "I spent most of my life assuming ordinary was a consolation prize, and then I met you. And now I think ordinary done right is the whole point," people cried. My sister had finished the charcuterie by then and was sobbing openly. Petra was holding it together with the rigid focus of someone who has decided they absolutely will not cry and is losing the battle. At the reception, Constance sat at a table with Dwight and his wife, and according to Petra, who has eyes everywhere, had 2 glasses of wine and laughed twice at things Dwight said. Not performed laughter. Real laughter, the startled kind. I did not need an apology from her at the reception. I did not need a grand moment of reconciliation. I have learned in my work and in my life that change doesn't usually arrive in dramatic speeches. It arrives in small choices made quietly, when nobody's watching. The fact that she stayed, the fact that she laughed, the fact that when Fletcher introduced me to his company's operations manager, who had made the drive from the warehouse, Constance didn't flinch. Those were the things that mattered. We danced, Fletcher and I, to a song we'd argued affectionately about for 3 months and finally compromised on, neither of our first choices, both of our second, which I think is actually a better metaphor for marriage than most people admit. He held me the way he always has, like I was both the most precious thing in the room and also just, simply, the person he most wanted to be next to. There's a difference. I've thought about it a lot. My sister danced with Dwight's wife, who turned out to be an extraordinary dancer with zero visible self-consciousness, which my sister found immediately inspirational. Petra gave a toast that made 11 people cry and 3 people spit out their drinks. I will cherish it forever. Constance left before the last hour of dancing. She found me first, near the dessert table. I am very committed to the dessert table at every event I attend, and she said briefly, "I hope you'll give me another chance to know you." I said I thought that was a good idea. I meant it. We honeymooned in Asheville, North Carolina, which is beautiful in October in a way that doesn't try too hard. We hiked and ate well and read on the porch of our rented cabin in the evenings and argued about absolutely nothing of consequence. Fletcher finished East of Eden. He'd been rereading it slowly for months and put it down and said, "Okay." "That ending, I know," I said. "It's not a happy ending." "No, but it's the right one." We sat with that for a while. I have thought, since then, about what it means to be underestimated. It used to make me smaller. I would feel it happen and sort of fold inward. Make myself take up less room. Try to adjust to someone else's low expectation like it was a dress that didn't quite fit. But I should probably just wear anyway. That night at the rehearsal dinner, I felt it one more time, and then something shifted. I stopped trying to fit the dress. I stood up straight in what I was actually wearing. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. I help children find their way toward a life they can participate in fully. I drive a dented Civic. I have a cat named Biscuit who has decided the highest value real estate in the apartment is directly on top of whatever I'm trying to read. I am married to a man who loves Steinbeck and cooks better than me and chose to be known before being evaluated. I am, by most people's definition, ordinary. I have stopped thinking that's something to apologize for. I keep thinking about what Constance said when she walked into that bridal suite. Not the apology part. The part right before it, when she looked around the room at the dress and the flowers and the half-empty champagne bottle and her face did something complicated. Like she was doing math she hadn't expected to have to do. She'd spent over a year deciding who I was. That's the thing about snap judgments. They don't actually feel like judgments to the person making them. They feel like clarity, like efficiency, like knowing. And Constance is a smart woman. She raised a son who reads Steinbeck and cooks from scratch and chose kindness as a personality trait, which doesn't happen by accident. But even smart people can be so certain they already understand a situation that they stop looking at it clearly. That certainty was what cost her 14 months of knowing me. I'm not sure she's fully reckoned with that yet. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. That part isn't mine to control. What I've been sitting with lately is this. The way things unfolded wasn't luck. Constance said what she said at that rehearsal dinner because she'd made a long series of small choices to not look closer. At me. At her own assumptions. At what she actually valued versus what she'd been taught to value. And then those choices accumulated into one very public, very uncomfortable moment that she had to live with. That's not punishment from the universe. That's just how it works. The things we refuse to examine have a way of making themselves visible eventually, usually at the worst possible time. Fletcher did something harder than most people give him credit for. He spent a year building something real with me before any of the external noise had a chance to define it. That took a kind of discipline I'd come to deeply respect. The discipline of knowing what actually matters and protecting it from what doesn't. He could have led with his background. He could have let it do the work of making people comfortable with his choices. He chose not to, and that choice said more about his character than any balance sheet ever could. Integrity, I've learned, is mostly what you do when it would be easier not to. And I've had to look at myself honestly through all of this too. There was a version of me that would have softened Constance's apology into something easier to receive. Would have said it's okay before it was okay. Would have rushed to make the room comfortable at my own expense. I've done that my whole life in a dozen different rooms, with a dozen different people. The fact that I didn't do it that morning. That I let her words land and just stayed with them instead of immediately patching over the discomfort. That felt like something I'd been working toward without knowing it. Not toughness exactly. More like honesty. The willingness to let a real moment be real. I still drive the dented Civic. I still bring work to quiet coffee shops on Tuesday afternoons. I still think ordinary done right is the whole point. Nothing about the life I actually want has changed. But I think I stand in it differently now, more squarely, without the low-grade apology I used to carry around for not being something more impressive. Biscuit is asleep on my laptop charger as I write this, which is his preferred location and also deeply inconvenient. Fletcher is in the kitchen making something that smells like garlic and thyme. Outside, it is a regular Wednesday in Ohio, which is perhaps the most ordinary sentence I know how to write. I wouldn't trade it.